Okay, hello. I'm feeling a little bit out of place here because I'm not an iOS developer. It's not my world at all. I'm also aware that I'm the person who is standing in between you and your dinner, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So basically, I'm a web developer. I've been a web developer for a very long time. I'm a really old geek. I've been working on the web since the late 90s. I've been running a company since 2001, really as a web development company. And about 5 years ago, we launched a little product, and that product was Perch. It's a small content management system. And just over a year ago, that product, which we launched completely as a side project, it became our entire business. We now don't write code for anybody else. We just work on that product. And we've had no investment, and we don't intend to take any investment, so Perch is still very much a sort of bootstrapped, self-funded product. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, how to build profitable businesses out of side projects, out of small things that you start creating on the side without taking investment and without sort of needing to do the whole startup thing. Now, it has to be said, there's a whole bunch of business information online. You've only got to go and open up Medium, and you'll find plenty of 20-year-olds who would like to give you life lessons. And, I've handed out plenty of business advice myself. But for the bootstrapper, for people doing side projects, a lot of that advice just isn't relevant, because a lot of that advice is really aimed at the funded startup, because that's where kind of all the noise is coming from. Funded startups are essentially about speed. So any advice aimed at those startups tends to be about rapid growth, because those funded startups really are a race to the line. They're a race to the line before the money runs out, or a race to get the next round of investment. They've got to show that they've got the growth to get more investment. Now, bootstrap products just aren't like that. They tend to have a very, very slow growth curve. They're much more like running a marathon. And I know a bit about that because that's me after running the London Marathon a few weeks ago. And bootstrapping my business is very much like distance running. You keep slogging on, even when it gets really, really boring, and even when you're tired, because you've got some finish line in sight. As well as talking about speed, advice for funded startups doesn't tend to talk about boring things like profit and loss or cash flow. They talk about passion, they talk about community, they talk about doing the right thing and not selling out. Except then, of course, they do sell out when they get sold to someone who offers them an awful lot of money. Now, advice relevant to bootstrappers tends not to be like that. It's a bit more measured. It's a bit more like just standard business. We're making a thing, we sell it for a profit, and that's how we run our businesses. So because of this sort of difference in types of products, there are some products which really lend themselves far better to someone who wants to bootstrap and to someone who wants to create a side project. I'm going to talk a bit about some of those things now. Because I find that a lot of people never get past the first hurdle with creating products. Lots of people talk to me, and since I've started talking about this stuff, people come and talk to me and they say, oh, I've got this great idea, will this fly? Is this the sort of thing that will work? And I can't validate people's ideas for them. But there's a few things that I've seen over and over again as being kind of a good idea. So have a look for products that are for audiences that you're already part of, that you can get to a shippable version 1 really quickly, that solve a problem people will pay to have solved, that don't need lots of traction, and that actually have competition already. So we can talk a bit about these. Firstly, really important, build for your own people. Because I think as makers, as people who want to build things, we see problems everywhere. So, we'll go to our doctors, or we'll be in a restaurant, and we'll see some really poor workflow going on. And we think, as developers, as people who build things, we think we could solve that for them. I could go out, I could build something, I could build an app, I could build a product that would fix this problem. But if you go and do that, you've kind of got two problems. Firstly, does it solve a problem that they care about? They might have some terrible workflow, but just not care. And secondly, you're an outsider in that community. You're going to have to build trust before you can actually start selling them anything. Building for your own people essentially shortcuts the amount of research you need to do. Of course, it's not impossible to build for a market that you don't know. But you kind of have to do a lot of legwork to do that. You're going to have to do a lot of knocking on doors. You're going to have to do a lot of talking to people. And if you're building as a side project, you just don't have that time. With Perch, we essentially looked for problems close to home. You know, it's a content management system. We were already building content management systems. We were building them on a larger scale for bigger projects. And clients would come to us and say, have you got anything to recommend that's on a small scale? And so that's where Perch came from. We could already chat to web designers because we were already working with them, and they kind of knew us. And the other thing about this is that the worst thing that could have happened with Perch is that no one else would have wanted it, but we'd have still had it for us. So we kind of would have still won. We'd have still had a useful product for our own business, even if nobody else out there wanted it. The other thing about building for your people is that you can leverage the trust you've already got. If people know who you are. Drew and I were both members of the Web Standards Project. We've kind of been around for a long time, as I mentioned at the start. And so when we said we're going to launch a new CMS and it's going to take great care of your markup, it's going to be accessible, people trusted us. In fact, they trusted us enough to buy the product sight unseen because we had no demo. We had no way of trying it when we first launched, and yet people still bought it. Now, this is really important, I think, for the bootstrapper. You know, build something you can get to version 1, a shippable version 1, really quickly. Perch took about 4 weekends of work to get to version 1, and all the other stuff you have to do to launch a product, that kind of took another four weekends. So 8 weekends of work, and we were able to put out a product that people would pay for. And in fact, that product was profitable in terms of cash outlay within 24 hours. And I think probably most people here have heard of this term minimum viable product, using an actual product trimmed down to the smallest thing it can be to try and test the market. So rather than going out there and asking people if they think something's a good idea, actually putting a product out there and seeing if they'll buy it. Now, if even the core of your idea is huge, that's something that needs building by a bigger team. It's not a great idea for a bootstrapper. It probably needs some investment. And it's important to say that launching an MVP isn't about launching something that's half-finished and rubbish. It's not about that. It's about being able to solve an initial problem in a small way. Solve something that people are happy to pay for, but just doing a small thing, not something enormous. So you have to find a problem that you can solve with a small product. And as an example, our version 1 of Perch, it was simply a simple content editor. You couldn't add new pages. There was no API. Images could be uploaded, for example, but they couldn't be resized. But it solved a problem. And the problem it solved was that web designers were developing websites as just HTML and CSS. And they'd get it out there, they'd launch it, and the client would say, oh, but can I edit the homepage myself? And then they'd have to go and put it into WordPress or something and build the whole site into a theme, and that took a bunch of time. So that first version of Perch, it gave them a way to turn static pages into editable pages, and that was it. That was the problem that it solved. It does an awful lot more now, but that's, 5 years on. And this leads on to my next point. The problem that you're solving needs to be something that people are happy to pay to have solved. It's amazing how many groups of people have problems that they're perfectly happy to carry on with their terrible workflow to do. They're not interested in paying for something to fix that. And you'll see this a lot out there in consumer space. Business to consumer stuff, really, really hard, because consumers don't have that whole time and money thing. They don't think, oh, if I buy this and it saves me 2 hours a day, that's great, I'm quids in. Businesses do. It's generally far easier to sell to businesses than consumers. And it's really important to charge for things. Even if, you're building a side project, you're like, well, it doesn't matter if I don't have any revenue for a while. It doesn't matter because it's a side thing. I've already got my consultancy or my day job or whatever. But the feedback you get from people who've given you money is very, very different to the feedback you get from free users. Lots of people will give you plenty of suggestions for features for your product, but they're not willing to pay for them. You want to know what the people who will pay want, because they're the most important people if you're trying to run a business. Now, I think this is where people fall down. There are lots of really interesting ideas out there, but they only become useful if lots of people take up on them. So things like this are, any kind of social or community products. They need lots of users before they can succeed. So these tend to take quite a bit of time and money to pull off because you need to throw money at customer acquisition till you've got enough customers that other people say, oh, well, all my friends are there, so I'll join too. So these tend not to be great things for a bootstrapper to try and do, unless you know that you can get an initial user base from somewhere due to some other contact you have. They're probably not the best idea for side projects and for bootstrappers. Now, this might seem a little strange. Why look for things that have got competition? But I launched a CMS. So these were some of the things that were my competition at launch. We've got a load more now. A lot of this competition was free. It didn't cost people anything. So I launched into a very, very competitive market. But the thing is, if you've got a crowded market, people need the thing, and they know what it is. They know what it's for. You obviously need to know why you're different. What pain point are you solving that existing products don't solve? The thing is, all those existing products make it really easy to do all your market research because you can just go and hang around their forums. You can look on Twitter and see what their customers are asking for that they don't do yet. So you can use the fact there's competition to find out what's needed. If you try and bring something that's new and groundbreaking to market, then you're going to have to spend a whole bunch of time just educating people as to why they even need what you're selling them. If you go in with something which already exists, you're saying, well, this is better than X, or this is better than that for this situation, which is really what we've done with Perch. So once you've got an idea, you've got something you want to build, the number one thing people talk to me about is, well, how on earth do I find the time to build a side project? I've got a job, I run a consultancy, whatever. How do you find the time? I don't think I've got any sort of real silver bullets on that, but I get quite a lot done, and so I'm going to share some of the things that have worked for me. And what I would say is the thing you want to do actually really important to you? If something is always, oh, I'll do that later, I'll do that when I've got time, then, maybe that's not a goal that really matters. Do you really want to build a thing that you're going to have to throw your evenings and weekends into? So by its very nature, a side project is going to be time constrained. So one of the really important things is you need to be able to pick it up and put it down again quickly. Because you need to be able to put time into it to get it finished, but you also can't let it take over all of your time so you can't pay the bills because you're not doing your consultancy work or you're not doing your day job. You need to be able to pick it up, put it down. So that might be making sure you've got your development environment all sorted so you can switch into it whenever you get a bit of downtime. It might be getting really good at working on aeroplanes, which is what I do. I do all my writing sat on airplanes and in airports when I'm sort of half offline. So it's making sure that you can do the work you need to do in those bits of time that you've got to do it. I think your product should become a first-class citizen if it really matters. And what I mean by that is, if you're a freelancer and you do client work, your product should be as important as that client work. It might be that you can only give it half a day a week, but that time should be its. It should be assigned to it. It should be scheduled in. It should be as important and a first-class citizen. Set aside time, and if you can, have the same time each week, that really works well because that's the time you're going to get to work on your product. But especially plan in advance what you're going to do in that time. Because I think we all do this thing where we've got a thing we really like working on, and we get to that half day, we get that afternoon, we can work on it, we sit down and we think, oh, what am I going to do? And so then we end up kind of researching and sort of poking around the internet, finding other things, or we don't really get on with the jobs. So make sure you actually know what you're going to do in the time when you get to it. And set goals. I think that setting goals and having deadlines is pretty much vital in order to keep moving things forward, especially things that are going to happen quite a long way in the future because you've only got a small amount of time to dedicate to them. And there really is a lot of power in just setting a goal and working towards it. Because if we don't have goals, we just have these things that sit around and we chip away at when we've got the time. And actually, none of us have ever got any time. No one has free time, do they? You know, you've always got something you need to be doing. And the nice thing with having goals with dates on them is that you can then start to work back from that date. You can work out whether you've got enough time to achieve what you want. I'll be tweeting a link to my slides later, but this is an article which is in my resources, which is a really great way of breaking down a kind of long-term goal into chunks. To work out, you know, from an end date, how you're going to start today, what you need to be doing. And you do need to be realistic. It's incredibly demotivating if you feel like you are constantly behind. You're constantly running to catch up. Oh, I should have already done all of this stuff. So you need to make sure that you don't set yourself up with a completely unrealistic time frame to start with. So if you decide on an end date, work your way back, realize you've not got enough time, what do? You know, you can either revise your end date or you can start to remove elements of the project and push them into a post-launch phase. And I'd always recommend trying to do that, trying to trim down as much as possible the idea, trim down what you're going to ship so that you can get it out there as quickly as possible. Because as you're developing, you're going to come up with loads of new features that you think really need to be in that product that you ship. It's like, oh, we can't launch it if it doesn't have X or Y. The thing is, they matter to you because you know about them. But what your end customers see, they probably won't care because they don't know that those things, you know, were kind of considered. An advantage of getting to launch quickly is that you can start to test the idea with real people, and you can find out which features they really do need and which were things that you thought would be a good idea, but actually nobody cares about. Because once you've got customers, you're going to get loads of features, suggestions, and that things are going to come in, they're going to tell you what they want. When we launched Perch, you know, we didn't have an outcry from customers who felt shortchanged because we sold the product exactly as it was. You know, we told people, well, this is what it is, this is what it does, and this is what it doesn't do. So people were buying the thing that solved their problem. They didn't mind that it didn't have all these features. So really, you know, my key piece of advice for anyone wanting to do this, anyone wanting to get a product out there, is to start small. Start small, get feedback from paying customers, and then you can start to improve. You can iterate on that product based on their feedback and also, you know, your vision for it. So once you've launched a thing, you think, oh, great, you know, that's the day, we're going to launch it. You get it out there. You think, brilliant, we can now step back and have a bit of a break. But if it's successful, nope, no break. Because you're going to have all these customers. You've got a new problem. You've got paying customers, and they will be telling you the things that they want because they're going to spot things that they think are missing, whether or not those match up with the things you think are missing. So this is our timeline. I mentioned that bootstrap products take quite a long time to start to become successful. We launched Perch in May 2009, and at launch, you know, we launched Perch, and the next day we were back into client work because we built it in the weekends. We were still 100% booked on client projects. The income from Perch was initially reinvested into it to get various bits and pieces done. And then in 2013, January, we made the decision to stop taking on client work. I think the hardest part of all of that was when we were about 50-50. We had 50% client work and 50% Perch, and we were kind of dragged by customers in one way and clients the other. And I run the company with my husband, so we were kind of balancing that with our home life as well. I mentioned earlier that your product should become a first-class citizen. And if it becomes successful, what should happen is that you should be able to assign more time to the product and less time to whatever else it is that you're doing. If you kind of just see it as a side project forevermore, you can find it getting pushed aside by the client work, and we certainly felt that was happening. So you should be able to afford to give it more time as it grows. Now, if you can't, you've got a problem. Because if you've got something that you're selling and it's not making you enough money to devote time to it, then that's an issue. Now, it might be that you're pricing too cheaply. It might be that you're reliant on expensive services. And we hear all the time of products that fail because they rely on expensive storage, for example, and they'd not kind of imagined how much this was going to cost as they got lots of users. So that might be a problem. It might be that you're attracting customers who need an awful lot of support. As the owner of a self-hosted CMS, we get a huge amount of support, and most of it is nothing to do with our product. And certain customers need more support. So that can be an issue. But that's kind of one of the benefits of being a bootstrapper. We don't typically have tens of thousands of users suddenly diving on our products because we don't have the money to spend on customer acquisition. So it's a slow growth, and you can see problems as they start to arise, and you can fix them without your company being damaged by them. So I think that really is one of the benefits of bootstrapping. That slow growth curve can be quite useful to us. Now, I've got a few tips on just making that transition between doing one thing and moving into products. And I think these things kind of hold true, really, whether you're working on open source stuff, even if it's not paid. How do you manage the growth of a product? Now, I've talked a lot about putting dates on things and that goals and having deadlines is really important. Now, those goals and deadlines are for you and your company. You do not tell the customers about those dates that you're intending to launch things. Because it'll just cause you no end of trouble. With Perch, we've always been really aware that people are using the product in their own businesses. They're using it for their client work. So when we get customers asking us, when will this feature be ready, we don't tell them. And the reason that we don't tell them is that we don't want them to buy a license or to promise things to their client based on our timeframes, because we might push it back in our planning. And particularly if something's a side project, there's a ton of things that could just get in the way of you releasing something when you said you would release it. Now, of course, that does mean that customers might go elsewhere. If we say, well, yes, we're planning on adding that feature, but we can't give you a date yet, they might decide to go to one of our competitors. But that's kind of a risk we have to take. I'd rather do that than push something out before it's ready or promise things and let people down. I wouldn't like to feel that we were letting down someone and damaging their business. We also don't have a published roadmap, and part of that just allows us to be flexible. When, for instance, we launched Perch, responsive web design wasn't a thing. People weren't using their phones to browse the web like they are now, and so we didn't have anything for responsive web design. And then responsive web design became a thing. And so customers started demanding, ways of managing images for responsive design. And so we stopped everything and built that into the product, because that was the most important thing. And because we weren't tied to a kind of release date going forward into the future, we were able to do that. We could just push everything else back and work on what was the most important thing right then. It also means that sometimes, you start digging into the code and you realize that something is an awful lot more work than you thought it was going to be. And because we haven't told people it's going to be ready on X date, we don't feel like we have to put it out even though it's not quite ready and we're not happy with it. And again, that's helping our users and making sure that what they get works and is bug-free. You're going to get tons of feature requests, particularly if you launch with something small. And the one thing I would say about feature requests is they tend to be really, really specific. Customers will ask for the very thing that would help them with this specific project they're working on right now. But it won't be a general thing, and you can't kind of just add every little feature that everyone wants because you end up just with a real mess. If you can get to the heart of the problem they're trying to solve, that often helps you to build a more general sort of use case around what they want and find a way of solving what they want and what a lot of other customers would find useful too. Often you can't solve things in exactly the way that a customer wants. You just end up with these things that are just useful to a small minority. But we can usually find useful things. The other thing is that once we know the problem, we can usually help them right there and then. Even if we can't say, oh yes, that's just feature X, look in the docs, there it is. We can say, okay, well we can get you to that end point now by doing this, but we'll try and optimize that in a future release because we can see that that's a real need. So it lets us help them now and then work out what to do later. And when you do fix stuff, when you do add features that someone's asked for, when you do find a way of helping someone out, make sure you go back and let that customer know. Perhaps someone posted to a support forum and said, I'd really like this. Get back and let them know that what they asked for is there, because they really love to feel that they've helped move something forward. Something we do occasionally when we get chance, sometimes someone will ask for something that's so small that we can just roll it into the next release. It's a simple thing. It might be really obvious. It's just not something we'd come up against, so we hadn't added it. So we can add it to the release. And occasionally, because we release quite often, occasionally they'll ask for something in the morning. We'll be like, yeah, we could add that, and we'll add it. And it comes out in a release we do later that day or the next day. And they think this is like magic. And it's really nice for us because we feel like we're immediately giving things to customers. However, you have to balance that by protecting the product and protecting the core use case. In our case, the whole thing about Perch is that it's lightweight and small. It's not a huge bloated thing that involves needing to write loads of code to use. So while adding features, we have to be really careful not to turn it into another WordPress or another Drupal or what have you. We're now almost 5 years from launch. We're on to version 2 of the product. But the basic use case of Perch, this idea of being able to have an already built site, drop in a Perch tag, reload the page, and start editing content, that is still there. You can do lots of other things, but if you want to use Perch like that, and lots of people do, you still can. Having a core use case and protecting it really strongly helps you to be more kind of creative as well. You have to find alternate ways of doing things. You don't just cobble stuff in as fast as you can. What actually often happens is that the features we don't add or the things that we push back on or really have to work around are actually the kind of cleverer things. They're the things that would make our peers think we were great because we'd added those things, but they wouldn't help our core customer base who want simplicity and something that's easy. So often it's those sort of more technical things we have to think more carefully about adding. Again, I think that this is somewhere that the bootstrapper, our little teams of 1, 2, 3 people, I think it makes it much easier for us to protect the core of our products. If you've got big teams, it's a lot harder to do that because you have to have someone who is willing to say no and who's willing to protect it. In our case, Drew owns Perch Core, and he has final say about what goes in and what stays out. And I think that has really benefited Perch as we've gone through the years and not ended up with it sort of a big mess. Now, I mentioned that we make fairly frequent releases, and this is really important. When we went to Perch 2, we knew we wanted to launch Perch 2, and Perch 2 was to make Perch better for bigger projects, really was the sort of idea behind it. Now, launching a new version of our product was a big deal anyway. There's only 2 of us. There was a lot of work to do. But we kind of got obsessed by this Perch 2 release, and it being, a big marketing win, really. And so, then we had to redesign the website, so we had to work with contractors for that, and we wanted to rebuild all our documentation, so then we had to get that done and all written. And it became a bigger and bigger thing and got further pushed back because we would have to do all this stuff. And it became very stressful. And Perch 2 was successful in the end when we got it out there, but the whole process was hard work. And so now we try and iterate on everything as we go along, and that's the product, but that's also the support materials and the website. We just try and keep bumping those things forward, keep moving everything forward with frequent small releases rather than going for great big relaunches of huge chunks of our business. I mean, obviously, small release in terms of code, fewer changes, fewer things to go wrong. Our product is downloaded by our customers, so they install it on their hosting. There's many things that can go wrong and do. So if we change fewer things, it's easier for us. It's obviously easier to isolate the problems when they do occur. And, it gets things out to customers. And importantly for us, for anyone who's putting stuff in front of end clients, there's less of a dramatic change. If we change only a few things, then our customers don't have to explain to their clients, oh, all these things have changed. You need to look here and do this. It's just less of a change for everyone. And as a final word of advice on features, for Perch, we only ever hear from about 25% of our customers in support. And we only ever hear from about 10% more than once. And so the customers who regularly offer feedback, the customers who talk to us, are a very small minority of people with licenses. We have people who have tens, up to 100 licenses who we never, ever hear from. So it's very easy to feel as if everyone wants a certain feature. And actually what it is that one or two people are just very noisy about that feature. You're going to have to say no to people if you're protecting your core use case. And it's kind of really important to make sure that the things you're saying yes to and the things you're saying no to represent what the majority want. And the happy majority tend to be pretty quiet. So after time management, the next thing people ask about is marketing. And I guess most people here are probably developers and designers. We're not people who marketing comes really that easy to. It certainly isn't something that I've found very easy and I've had to learn about. The thing is, we're the best people to market products that we make because we get excited about them. We're the people who know what difference it can make in someone's life if they're using our thing. We're excited about how we've built it. We're excited about the code. We're excited about what it can do. So actually, I think developers and designers of products can be great marketers because they are the people who are passionate about their thing. Sales and marketing are essentially just about you telling people about this great thing that you've developed. Because you don't want to persuade anyone who doesn't need your product to buy your product, because they're nightmare customers. What you want are people who need your product to hear about it. You've got something that's going to make people happy. They're going to be happy to have found you. Bring your product to those people. Now, some sort of practical suggestions. Before we launched Perch, we put up a landing page, which is sort of a fairly common thing to do, and an email sign-up form. We had about 500 people signed up for that, just from our own networks, really. We're building this thing, go and sign up, it's going to be cool. That was really the marketing that we did at that point. Within 24 hours from the sales from those people, after we emailed that list, we were able to pay back all our sort of fixed pre-launch costs within 24 hours, which was pretty cool. At least sort of proved that people needed this thing. Now, I've heard those kind of figures working similarly for other people. If you've got a bit of reach, you're launching to your existing community, you should be able to get a number of people who want to buy your thing if it really does solve a problem that people need solving. If no one buys your thing and you manage to get people to sign up who sound interested, then maybe you need to be looking about, well, does it solve enough of a problem for people? However, you're going to get through your reach fairly quickly. You're going to be able to reach a certain number of people. Your contacts are going to be able to reach a certain number of people. But just sort of shouting on Twitter, hey, I've launched a thing, is going to get old fairly quickly, and people just stop listening. So you're going to have to think about how to start finding other customers and other people out there. Now, you might hear about content marketing quite a bit in the bootstrapping world, and that's because content marketing, as long as you can write reasonably well, content marketing ends up being free. And as bootstrappers, we love anything that is free. Unfortunately, it's not just about writing a few blog posts and seeing the traffic come in. You've kind of got to take a bit more of a strategic approach. Again, having goals for the stuff you're doing, making sure the things you're writing are actually reaching the community who might want to buy your stuff. The important thing is you need to look at what your potential customers are interested in hearing about. They're probably not interested in hearing about your product. They're interested in other things that might lead them to your product. So I don't write and speak very much about content management, for instance, because my potential customers aren't really interested in that, but they are interested maybe in front-end development. And so I might write and speak about front-end development. That kind of brings people then to what we're doing, and they realize that, oh, these guys have got a CMS, and they know about front-end development, so that means it might care about code. It's that kind of way. It's not writing directly about the product. Writing about your product's cool. It will interest your customers. It will interest your competitors. We'll find out what you're doing. And it's quite interesting talking about what you're doing, but it's not so great for content marketing. Sponsorship is another way to sort of get the word out, and it's something I quite like. I'd rather spend the limited advertising money we've got supporting interesting events or publications to people that we care about. I'd much rather do that than just sort of throw it at Google Ads or what have you. You know, depending on the industry, sponsor slots can range from a few dollars to tens of thousands. What we've found is that what works best is if we sponsor things where we can be there. So if we sponsor a conference, it's better if we can be at the conference, maybe with a table formally to sort of hand out stickers and talk to people. Because then we kind of get two things. We get the awareness of what we do. We also get to talk to potential customers, find out if they've heard about us, what they think, you know, have they got any strange ideas about what we do or don't do. So that's quite interesting and useful to us. Probably industry specific, but our standout success with marketing has been sponsoring podcasts, which is pretty cheap to do. Yeah, this is the Unfinished Business podcast. It's pretty cheap to sponsor them, and we found that really, really good, particularly in the sort of sponsorship where the host will look into what you do, maybe have a chat with you about it, and talk quite personally about the product. That's worked really well. And then, of course, there is paid advertising, whether it's Google Ads or advertising on specific sites and things. Not really my favorite sort of thing to do. It always seems a bit like kind of throwing out money and seeing what will happen. What I would say is that really, don't pay for stuff you can't track results of, because otherwise, you've got no idea what's performing well. So you're going to need to have some kind of sales page or landing page rather than just driving people to an app store. The metric that matters is the percentage that turn into paying customers or who do something that shows they're actually more engaged than just turning up, just clicking through. And if you're going to try things like AdWords, try the long tail keywords. That's the sort of phrases that people might use, less popular phrases rather than just, we don't advertise CMS, for instance. That's going to be a very expensive keyword. You can look for longer phrases that people might use. The nice thing about those longer phrases is they kind of show intention. You can pick on things that show actually that people are looking for something a bit like what you do rather than just something very general. And again, you need to experiment with these, which is where tracking comes in. What I prefer to do, rather than just AdWords and so on, is look for smaller sites, more specific sites, more niche things that have customers who might be interested in what we do. I use buy-sell ads to research sites. I go to the site, I read some of the articles, I find out whether it looks like the sort of people reading that site are going to be interested in what we do, and then we'll try out an ad and see how it converts. A bit more legwork than just, putting up some ads, but that does seem to work an awful lot better. And you can often find some quite cheap sites, very inexpensive adverts, will drive quite a lot of good customers because their audience is very well matched with you. And remember that your happy customers will always be your greatest advocates, so ask them to help you spread the word. If they love what you do, it's in their interest to help you to continue as a company. Our perchers are amazing. They do things like, if we see someone on Twitter asking about perch, we'll just retweet that from the Grab a Perch account. And then what happens is our customers will reply to that person who is asking the question and tell them what they honestly think. And it's brilliant, because we don't have to turn around and say, we're not replying and saying, oh, yes, we're great. What we've got is like 20 of our customers replying to that person and saying, oh, it's great, I do this, and you can do that, and you can solve that problem like this. And we can step out of the equation. So, use your customers, because, if they care about your product, they'll care about your success as a company. Now, ultimately, my side project became our entire business. But many side projects are going to remain side projects, and that's, absolutely cool. The beauty of side projects is they can be used to solve niche problems that would never be big enough to be an entire business. But actually, as part of a portfolio of ideas or, as a side project on a consultancy, can still have legs and be worth doing. Your product doesn't need millions of happy users to be a success, no matter what the sort of press says. Define what success is going to look like for you. Sort of billion-pound acquisitions are vanishingly rare, but there are good, profitable, small businesses really around every corner. I think something that's not said often enough is that when you own 100% of your business, The only thing that matters is you and your customers. You can spend all your time making customers happy and making your product great. As a consultancy, we often didn't get to see how the end customer used our work. And now every day, we're interacting with the people who use Perch. We see the difference it makes in their business, and that's, really a huge privilege. We haven't just built a business around Perch. We've actually learned a huge amount, and we're still learning. When we worked for clients, we were often really frustrated because we'd give them advice and it would be ignored. Now we have to take our own advice, and sometimes we don't. And sometimes it's actually quite hard work being the client. I'm often the client these days. Launching any product is hard work. Launching as a side project is probably going to mean that you have to spend quite a lot of evenings and weekends working on it. The work is definitely worth it. I can absolutely promise you it's worth it. Thank you very much. The slides and so on will be online.